Hello, today John Oxley and I welcome Mark Tweedie, currently the Chief Exec at Brimham's Active in Harrogate and often referred to by those in the know as the architect or godfather of pivot to active wellbeing as a result of his work at Active Tameside. Mark outlines his journey to date through sports development initially, through to his groundbreaking work with Active Tameside and how he successfully developed the template for how to work with health and social care in different guises ever since. As a former CEO of Community Leisure UK, Mark had a national platform, and I can't help but feel that it would be great to have him back in some national role in the future. But for now, please enjoy the fascinating story of my good friend, Mark Tweedie.
Welcome, Mark. Welcome to the Conveners podcast. I'm here with Mr. John Oxley, and between us, we hope to sort of delve into a little bit of your thinking about a number of topics, not least the dreaded pivot word. But before we do any of that, can you just tell us a little bit about your career today, please?
Well, sure. It's thanks for inviting me to this legendary podcast. So today I started out life as a PE teacher, and that's because I was a failed professional athlete. Almost made it, but didn't quite. Mm-hmm. So I went into PE teaching, which I was very passionate about, enjoyed very much. Then an opportunity came up within the sport that I love, which is triathlon, to get involved in supporting the organisation of the Commonwealth Games in Manchester in 2002. So I thought, well, I'll have a break from PE teaching, go and do that, and then come back into teaching. But that actually led to me having a good relationship with the guys at Salford Sports Development, and I ended up working for them for a few years, which then led to me not going back into teaching, and then going working in Tameside in a kind of education / kind of sports development, PE / sports development role. And it was the time of the school sports partnership era with Sue Campbell. So we were one of the early adopters of that programme. And I got one of these jobs, which was called Partnership Development Manager, which was basically managing a school sport and PE programme to improve participation. And the headline target was 2 hours, getting all kids to do 2 hours PE a week. But also something that was fantastic about the programme was connecting schools with community, which is probably still a deficit now. But Sue Campbell had a fantastic vision, really grew the Youth Sport Trust to grow this programme. And this network of people across the country. We were one of the early networks, and I was a partnership development manager managing a cluster of secondary and primary schools in Tameside. So I did that. That was great. Learnt a lot from that. And then ended up being head of leisure and sport for Tameside Council. And Tameside Council, quite ambitious, deprived area, lots of health inequalities, good leisure provision, good sports development provision. A guy called John Knighton that was head of sports development there was probably one of those iconic kind of managers that you have in your career. Learned a lot from John. Lovely guy, really values driven. Had a great kind of sports development team and a massive coaching in schools programme. It was amazing. And so worked there with John and others. And then around about 2010, we were getting in the depth of austerity. And leisure in Tameside was operated by a trust. It was outsourced in 99, and the trust was getting into difficulty because it couldn't quite manage what were imposed savings targets from the council, because the council obviously budget was being reduced dramatically with austerity, like they were across the country. And I was head of leisure, so I was on the client side.
Boom.
Yeah, so it got challenging, and the trust got to the point with the council where it was saying, look, we can't achieve these savings, we can't do it. So one thing led to another, and I ended up working really closely with the trust management team and the board, and that led to me producing a recovery plan, really, or reinventing the trust and supporting the management team to do that. And we did that, and over the course of a short period, we had a good plan, and eventually I ended up leading that plan as chief executive of the trust. The trust kind of invited me in to be, and the council, to be their chief executive. and the general manager at the time, it wasn't the chief executive, left, took retirement, and I took over. And we delivered some quite remarkable things. Firstly, huge savings. I think we reduced the staffing bill by about 600k in the first 2 years.
Wow.
It was huge. We actually managed to deliver more outcomes as well by reconfiguration. And I do remember picking up the phone to you then, Andy, actually, and saying, Andy, I've got this new responsibility, not quite sure what I'm doing here. Can you come and
I do recall.
Can you go and give us a hand? So obviously the support that you gave me then was invaluable, and those kind of pointers was fantastic. I remember you saying to me at the time, he says, I'll come over, I'll charge a day out to you of my time. And you said to me, I've enjoyed it so much, I'm not going to charge you.
Those days are over.
Yeah.
When did you change?
So and then after that I ended up moving to Northumberland. Had a job there for a while, managing the Leisure Trust up there, but that was to relocate the family into a lovely part of the world. I did a short stint at Community Leisure UK during the kind of lockdown periods of the pandemic, so I got a good kind of overview really of how leisure was operating around the country and the pressure that the operators were under. I was a sounding board for a lot of leisure operator chief execs that were having tough times during that period, and did very well in tough times and really showed what we can do as a sector. And now, last 3 years, I took a job in Harrogate to set up a local authority trading company, which we may talk about. It's the new model, really, one of the new models for running leisure for Harrogate Borough Council, which is now North Yorkshire Council after local government reorganisation. So launched that, wrote the strategy, reconfigured the team, got everything lined up, mission, vision, mission, purpose. And we're doing some transformational stuff there around the word you used earlier, I think the pivot word, which I'm sure you're going to ask me some questions on later.
Thanks, Mark. And it's a fascinating career which we'll delve into a little bit shortly. But just sticking with your personal, and to come absolutely clean. We actually went to college together, didn't we? Years ago, which is where we knew each other.
Was it clean?
Well, yeah, and we actually started a triathlon club, I remember. So I know a little bit about this myself, but for the listener, in terms of physical activity, how important has it been, and does it continue to be in your life more generally for you personally?
Well, massively important. It's a love-hate relationship, like it is probably for loads of people.
Explain.
Well, the different ways actually. Back in the college days, I had this dream of being a professional triathlete.
You were very good, top 10 in the country, I recall.
Well, yeah. Thanks, Andy. That's nice of you to say. And when you get close to the top, it's you always realise how far you're away from being the top. When you're knocking on the door. So almost there, but not quite. Which was the love-hate thing. Loved it, but hated not being able to make those final marginal gains. And I think, to be honest, it was, you can't put in what God left out unless you've not got those super genes. You're not going to
Very true.
Be in that top tier. You can train just as hard, you can try just as hard, but you just haven't got what God left something out, in terms of your ability.
Yeah.
But did really well, got a lot from the sport. Great camaraderie. We had a great time at the college, setting up the club, under your kind of leadership, really. And still haven't forgotten that disc wheel you got me, Andy. It's part of the sponsorship with Peugeot. Disc wheels, if anyone knows about cycling, that's the holy grail. You have a disc wheel and it really does improve your times, but they cost a bloody fortune, especially when you're a student.
Don't ask where I got it from.
Yeah, so that was brilliant. So loved it from a sports perspective, and then later on in life, fast forward 30 years, aches, pains, again, the love-hate, back, herniated disc in my back, arthritic knees, rotator cuff, probably all from training and sport and other things. But so really physical activity now is about managing conditions and keeping me upright. Which managed to stay off the operating table with 2 herniated discs over a period of 5 years, really bad. But I think physical activity and conditioning, core conditioning, kept me off the operating table for that.
Okay. Yeah.
So recognise physical activity from sport right through to rehab, right through to just good mental health, really.
Yeah, so still vitally important, but in a completely different way. Yeah, rings true.
Tweeds, that's a brilliant introduction to your career, and what struck me as you were talking was how how deliberate and purposeful each career shift has been. It sounds like it's driven by passion and desire. What gets you out of bed these days?
Yeah, great question, John. Yeah, well, a good coffee. Very happy with just a good coffee these days, to be honest. But no, what gets me out of bed is very purpose driven, like we all are. I know you two are as well. Very purpose driven, and the purpose really is. It sounds twee, but just like to make things better.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Just like to make things better. And I found that physical activity for me and everything that offered me in terms of physical mental wealth and well-being and connection and friendships was just so good. I thought, I just need to share this with everybody. I need to open access and opportunity to this for more people.
Give us a flavour. Give us a flavour of what that clarity of purpose looks like, then, Mark.
That's a tricky question, John.
I'm full of them.
Yeah. Prawn cocktail flavour. Everybody loves a prawn cocktail, Chris, don't they? I mean, are you looking for examples here?
I suppose it comes from that belief about physical activity and that belief about making things better. But in the context of where we work just now, in terms of population health, in terms of the fact that we had a Marmot report 14 years ago now, and health inequalities remain unchanged over 14 years, despite the three of us being, we're pretty good at what we do. And there are others who are pretty good at what we do, but we've still got that situation. So it's in the context of that, really. What's that purpose that really gets you to leap out of bed and say, we can do stuff different?
Yeah, I've got it.
Yeah,
it's more and better outcomes for less. That's my purpose.
Yeah.
So I see, rightly or wrongly, with 30 years working either in the public sector or arm's length from the public sector, I see a huge amount of resource. I see a huge amount of assets, physical assets, people assets, huge amounts of potential, but I just don't think it's aligned efficiently.
Yeah.
So I think, and behind all that, what we've got is a situation of inequalities that hasn't been addressed, as you just said, John.
Yeah.
Gap's probably getting wider.
Yeah.
The UK economy is, deteriorating. We have got increased demands on the health and social care system. So my original purpose, which was, look, I think I can align things better here. I think I can get into organisational leadership, make things more efficient and effective. My purpose now is stronger than ever.
Yeah.
Because I see what's going around me is actually worse now than it was 10 years ago. And it really does create a bit of a fire in my stomach to think, I really want to work with colleagues to try and do my best to make a contribution, to see if we can turn the dial on this, because there is a better way. And actually, it's not necessarily about having, a plethora of new resources. We can do a lot of work to make our resources that we've got work better.
Yeah.
And that's my phrase of more and better outcomes for less.
Yeah.
That's what that means.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. Let's pick up this pivot thing then, because I know you've got some views about this, which I'm really keen to sort of get out of you, if we possibly can. So, the term pivot suggests that we're going from something to something. It's also then been adopted as pivot to active well-being, and I think you've got some thoughts about that as well. So, are we making progress? Is it the right direction? Should we be working hard to work with health and social care? And I often term you as being the architect of pivot, to be honest.
The Godfather.
The Godfather, no less. Genuinely, because of what you did in Tameside many, many years ago. I remember you showed me around Active Tameside facilities, and you had a Prue there long before anybody else did, as far as I'm aware. We'll come on to that later on, about awareness of what actually the sector does in the dark corners around the country. We'll come on to that. But pivot to active wellbeing, yes or no? Over to you.
Short answer, yes. Absolutely. I think we've given a name to something that's getting traction now, but it has been around for some time, and it's been around in pockets around the country. So there's been a lot of good practice, probably for best part of nearly 20 years now. And I would certainly say in the last 10 years, there's been an emergence of more and more of organisational leaders doing the pivot. But we've given it a name now, and I'm fine with the name. If it resonates and if it gets out there and it starts the movement behind it, then that's the main thing. You know, and the movement is actually, you know, we've got a range of public assets out there. You know, we've got all these lovely leisure centres around the country. A lot of them are aging and require a lot of investment. We've got thousands of people in a workforce that are all passionate about physical activity and health. So how do we align them to a new movement? And if it's about the pivot, that's great, because what that's saying is, for me, what it's saying our public facilities aren't there to replicate the private sector and have a conventional fitness offer, you know, and learn to swim offer. That's not what we're about. We do all those things, but actually our public leisure facilities should be about filling the gaps where the private sector can't fill, should be about addressing inequality, the point that John mentioned before, and actually shouldn't just be about physical activity, because we're selling ourselves short. We're much more than physical activity. We're about meeting people where they are and meeting people's health and well-being needs, because we use physical activity to improve health. And actually, for me, as I said earlier, you know, in the conversation, physical activity wasn't just about getting a sweat on, getting my heart rate up and improving my physiology. It was about my mental health. It was about connecting with other people. It was about keeping an eye on my nutrition. It was about setting goals. It was about having structure in my life. It was about all these things. Overall, a massive impact on my own health and well-being. And I think that's the gift that we can give other people, but I think we need to package it properly, and we're not doing it right at the moment.
Okay.
And certainly we need to understand how we can reach out better and engage those people that can really get support with their health and well-being. Because, you know, a health and well-being strategy is an economic strategy, and this country's got economic issues. We've got huge issues in terms of people dropping out of the workplace, in terms of, you know, 2.5 million people on long-term sick. We've got massive aging population, massive demands on the health and social care system. It's health and well-being, and that's what's needed. And we need, I would say, a national wellness service alongside our national health service. You know, so
Well,
there's so much opportunity.
Hold that
Mark,
thought. We'll
yeah.
come on to that.
Mark, it's really interesting actually, and I like this thing about, you know, and I absolutely concur, this bit about, you know, we've got to fill the gaps where, you know, where the commercial sector can't or won't deliver, and that's quite right. And frankly, in terms of the public sector, who else is going to deal with that? However, there is a commercial dynamic here. We've got in the public sector, we're a non-statutory service. We continue to be in a period of austerity. If you look at the ability of local government to generate revenues, it's continually declined. Yet the demand on local authority services, adult social care, children's services, is escalating. How do you square off this need to address health inequality, improve population health, and be commercially sustainable?
Yeah, great question.
The black ones are the best ones.
Yeah. It's a great question. First of all, I'd say, John, Andy, what's your view? You're good at this. Come and help. And it was a pretty similar question that I asked Andy over 10 years ago, to be honest. And I think, to be fair to the three of us, we know that's been the sweet spot for us. That's where we've been heading and where we've been experimenting, and what we've all tried to do. You know, and I've tried to do it in my own way, and I've done some things that have worked and some things that haven't. But a couple of things really before I go into it. The first thing is this notion in the public sector that we can't afford to necessarily invest in prevention because we have got too much on the reaction side of it with health and social care, children's services, all those other things. Is everybody knows that it's an equation that doesn't work. And we cannot afford not to invest in prevention, because otherwise, we're never going to turn the dial. We're never going to get out of the pit. We're just in an ever decreasing circles. So we need to do something.
But in short-term political cycles, long-term strategies are tough to ground, aren't they?
Absolutely, and that is one of the big issues here with having long-term sustainable change. And I've forgotten the first question about commercial and
Well, how do you square it off?
things squaring up.
Yeah.
But just on the back of that question, John, I think for me, really, broadly speaking, there's three key things. The first one is, have we got a vision? Have we got the correct vision around all this stuff? And I don't think we have. It's fragmented. Everyone's got a slightly different idea, which I think the pivot is good, and hopefully that will lead to us having an overarching national vision about what we want from our public leisure services. What is their role within the wider complex system? What is it? Because people rally around a vision then, and absolutely, you know the people that we work with in our sector, once you give them a job to do, by God, they'll do a good job. They'll do an absolute cracking job. But we need a vision, and we need to rally around that vision. And it's a generational vision that has to go beyond political cycles. So 5 years is not enough to solve the problem that's taken 50, 100 years to create. So we need a generational vision. We need Vision 2050. UK Active have got Vision 2030 at the moment, which is great. But for me, it's Vision 2050. It's a generational vision. It's cross-party buy-in. And the leadership of the sector and sector leaders, it's about how they can come together and coalesce and really come up and solidify this vision and get a movement behind it that's got political traction and cross-party agreements. That's the first thing. The second thing is collaboration, which I know is huge for you, John, particularly, and Andy, with the work you've done at GM Active, and your pioneering work around leadership development, which is rooted in how do we genuinely, authentically collaborate, not just with each other within organisations, but across organisations. There's real opportunity here because we just haven't got it right, and a lot of that is because of the way the system is configured. Competitive tendering, 30 years ago, competitive approaches to fixed-term grant funding. All these things don't facilitate authentic and genuine collaboration. They're often a barrier. Protecting your organisation above the outcomes you're trying to deliver, which are shared with other organisations. They're not collaborative behaviours. And this is why what you've developed with your leadership course is fantastic, because I know that rooted in that it's the psychology of leadership and the psychology and the values behind your approach to collaboration. We need to see more of this at the national level, break down the boundaries between the national agencies so that there is genuine, authentic collaboration. And obviously the two areas where we'd love to see great collaboration is the National Health Service and public leisure or sport physical activity. Genuine collaboration there. People want to do it, but the system is not configured to facilitate it, and that's where there needs to be a change. But a vision will help that. And the last point I wanted to just jump in on, and it tracks back to a point Andy made earlier, is so you got a vision, you got collaboration. It's how you lead in a complex space, which again comes back to the work you've been doing. And leadership should be about serving others.
Exactly.
That's what leadership is about. Leadership is not about status, and I loved to hear you talk about that recently, John. But it's about leadership and authentic leadership in that space, which is really important. And people say to me, "Oh, Mark, great, looked at your track record," and Andy complimented me earlier, which is brilliant. And I could say the same about you guys and lots of other people in the sector. People like Jan Souness, 20 years ago, who formed Livewire, one of the trailblazers in terms of the pivot.
Absolutely.
And Emma that took over, and we've got loads of other great leaders in the sector. But none of us would be able to look back and say, look at those achievements without the people that work for us. And I just think the leisure workforce is amazing. So in Tameside, for example, the great work we did at Active Tameside was amazing work. We had an Everyone Can service, which was all about health and social care, supporting people with respite provision in leisure centres. But the people that drove that, it wasn't me, it was the people in that team were absolutely fantastic. Sean Higgins, his son Dan Higgins, others, they're all unsung heroes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for me, the leadership bit, this is my final point, was about how can we come in and create the conditions for those people assets to fulfill their potential and do an amazing job? And that's all I've ever done.
Yeah.
So all I've ever done is gone into an organisation and said, right, how can I create the conditions for you guys to thrive?
Exactly right.
And because we're in a leisure sector and a support sector, there's something about people in our sector. They're quite competitive. They want to make a difference. They want to share the love of physical activity. And they just do it.
Yeah.
And it's just tragic to see resource being withdrawn constantly in survival mode, pushing against the tide, trying to convince and prove everything that we do all the time, against often cynics. Really difficult, because for a fraction of the spend of the NHS and social care, we could set public leisure literally on fire to become the world's most amazing national wellbeing service, because we've got the people to do it. They're there.
I like this phrase around, it's the psychology of leadership. It's so important. It's often not what you say, but how you say it. This concept of creating the right conditions for people, like inspiring, the fire in their belly type thing, and this sense of authenticity around vision. It's not necessarily that vision needs to be complete, because part of it is we don't have all the answers. Part of it is an exploration, but it's having the preparedness and humility to sometimes say, I don't have all the answers, but if we keep asking the right questions, we'll get there with like-minded. If we put like-minded people together, we will. That vision will be more complete. That's the point. And sometimes I think others don't necessarily. They don't grasp that psychology of what authentic, humble leadership is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing with the vision as well, it's you use the word clarity. It is being really clear about what we're about, what our purpose is.
Yeah.
So I've had the good fortune to work with organisations and work with councils, and Harrogate Borough Council was a great example just recently, 3 years ago, where the lead member, Councillor Stan Lumley, great guy, and the chief exec of the council, director of community that leisure came under, said, look, Mark, you're the expert. We want a service that actually can turn the dial on health and well-being. So we brought you in as the expert to come and design a strategy and a plan to do that for us. And that was just making of a great relationship with the council as a leisure operator council partnership. It was a proper partnership. And they asked me those questions. They said, we don't know the answers, but we were asking you the questions. Can you come? And I said, look, I don't know all the answers, but this is what I can do.
Exactly.
And I'm going to create the conditions where we can do some good stuff. And that's what we did. And there was a lot of assets in Harrogate that we worked with. I inherited a great team already doing great work, but it was just about me pouring oil on the wheels, adding a little bit here, adding a little bit there, creating those conditions, creating that environment. And we've thrived, and we've really developed and formed a kind of new kind of wellbeing service. But coming back to the commercial point, this has been a really exciting part of the job for me, because it's being able to operate and being proud about creating businesses that are commercially sustainable but also deliver that social value. And if we're absolutely honest, this is where lots of areas of the public sector fall down, because they're not commercial and they think that commercial is a bad thing. We need public-private partnerships. This is the modern world. It has to be a
Mixed economy.
It's got to be a mixed economy. And people in leisure have learnt that trade because they've had diminishing resources, reduced levels of subsidy. They've had to go and look commercially where they can plug those gaps where they were otherwise getting that from public funding. And that's been a good thing, because people have sharpened their pencils, they've become better at what they do, they become more efficient. But what I've done is I've tried to become more efficient in the organisations that I've worked with, but not lose the effectiveness piece. So for me, the effectiveness piece is the outcomes. The outcomes. So what are my outcomes? And I've absolutely always been proud to say, measure me on the outcomes. Look at social inequality. Look at who we're dealing with long-term health conditions. Look at the percentage of people that are coming in on low incomes. Look at all these things, because that is absolutely a given. We are focused on that, as well as commercial numbers as well.
I've often quoted you, Mark, as a few years ago. I think it might have been when you were chief exec of CRUK, and you said, be careful what you ask leisure managers to do, because they might just do it. And we rose to the challenge of direct debits and being more efficient. So we drove the efficiency ticket. And I think, listening to what you just said there, if we had clarity, real clarity of purpose, and it was something that the whole sector and each individual manager and leader was absolutely clear on, then we could actually make a real difference. But you feel that clarity isn't there yet, despite people's best efforts. Is that a fair summary?
I think that's a very fair summary, Andy. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, staying with we've touched on leadership. You're going through all our questions without even asking, which I thought might be the case, which is brilliant. But just in terms of, there's a very recent article actually in Healthcare Management about the workforce being ready to support the NHS. I'd like to get your thoughts on that. And within that is the credibility issue with the NHS. You can pick that up as well. What do you think needs to happen to increase our credibility? And within that, possibly, is also, are we measuring the right thing? So is our workforce ready to support the NHS to the desire that some of us go on about?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one we've talked about, isn't it? And it's becoming an increasingly more a hot topic, which is good, because that means we'll come up with solutions. There's a book called out from a guy called Ryan Halliday, who I love. I've got into reading a lot about Stoicism, and one of his books is "The Obstacle is the Way." And basically, it's saying, look, you find where the problems are, and then you've got to deal with those head on, not work around them, because that's where you're going to get the gains. Workforce is the problem. It's absolutely the problem. Not the passion, not the capability, not the enthusiasm. We've got that. We've got that in, it's all there. And we've got huge leadership capability as well. But our big opportunity in leisure is to professionalise the service. But unless we know exactly what our purpose is and what we're going to do, we can't professionalise it in that direction.
Yeah.
So my view is, I would love to see Vision 2050, national wellness service, and we've got wellness coaches and wellness practitioners, and that's what we've got. And we're operating at the level just below the current level of allied health professionals, the physiotherapists, the nutritionists, those types of people.
Yeah.
Because then we can hit a mass population market, and we can reduce those demands on those allied health professionals, on the GPs. For 20 years now, 70 to 80% of GP appointments are made up of people showing up with preventable disease or disorder due to lifestyle. And no wonder the demands are excessive on the primary care side, because a lot of these this is getting worse with the ageing population and everything else. But a lot of these issues for people could be resolved without going into a clinical setting. So if we had a national wellness service with an army of wellness coaches that had the right skills, training and credentials to be able to deliver a service which operated just below the tier of those allied health professionals, we could prevent a lot of these GP visits and reduce demands hugely on the health and social care system. This needs a huge training program, it needs accreditation, it needs leadership, but it's absolutely possible with the right investment. It's absolutely possible, because we've got people with the capabilities and enthusiasm to do it.
And the credibility ticket, Mark, what have we got to do to be more credible? Because we seem to have this issue that we don't get turned to, well, not seem to, the fact is we very rarely get turned to at a national level to solve, or even contribute rather than solve, some of the issues to do with health that we know physical activity and wider wellness services could have a role to play. But we sort of get left out of the equation quite a bit. And the conclusion of that is we're not credible enough.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that? And if so, what could we do? And is it anything to do with what we measure?
Yeah. I think credibility is you're only as good as your last game. You're only as good as your weakest link. There's a huge amount of good practice in the sector, but there's also a lot of practice which is questionable. So within that environment and that landscape, we're not going to have credibility.
Okay.
So I don't think we're way off having the credibility we need with the NHS. Certainly been my experience. I've tried every which way I can to have a relationship with the NHS and public health. And sometimes it's been successful, sometimes it hasn't. But it's always been a long journey initially around building that partnership to prove credibility, because we come to the table without credibility. And when we're at the table, we have to put a lot of effort in to build that relationship with our local partners to create that credibility.
Yeah,
You know,
okay.
there are other sectors out there that bring credibility to the table before they've even had the conversation.
Yeah.
That's not us.
Yeah.
It's not us.
Do you think, therefore, that the NHS's perception of our sector is justified?
John, that's a general question. So,
Deliberately broad.
yeah. I think where you're going with that, John, is that the NHS haven't necessarily got don't look at us as a credible solution
Yeah.
to reduce demands on, the health and social care system. Is that what you're saying?
I suppose what I'm looking to explore is, because you talked earlier about this need to align things and to use effective collaboration in order to get that alignment, and then your Vision 2050 could be more easily realised. And I suppose some of those misalignments will be around perception and perspective of others. And I suppose it's our responsibility to demonstrate that humility and work towards changing the perspective of others. And we all experience these. I mean, I did a presentation to Sport England last week, and we did this the icebreaker was, what's your perception of the leisure sector? What's the first thing to think about? The first thing that came out was musty swimming pools. I said, well, welcome. Let me introduce myself. I'm Chief Executive of Musty Swimming Pools. And I know that similarly, I've had conversations with NHS colleagues who say, well, you exist just to get the fitter and charge excessive commercial rates for room hire. They're pretty blunt, stark perspectives, but that's that. We have to take that. So I suppose my question is, have they got justification in observing us in that way, and what do we have to do in order to change those perspectives?
Yeah.
Because it's clearly not true in every case, is it?
Yeah, I'm going to give you my honest thoughts on this, really. And my honest thoughts are, leaders that want to come from a judgmental perspective need to go on one of your leadership courses.
Sure.
And I see that from NHS leaders, I see it from leisure leaders, I see it from leadership across the piece. And I don't think any less of them for it. I think that I look at people and think there's an opportunity for you to develop as a leader, because leadership is not about judgment and saying my thought of leisure centres is musty swimming pools. Leadership is about saying my thought of leisure centres as a leader in the system and wanting to support it is there is an opportunity to work with that leisure operator to develop that environment to deliver more for that community. So how can I work with them? How can I give them my help? And actually what I'm talking about here is something called appreciative inquiry.
Yeah.
And I don't see enough of it. I see the default being, well, let's talk about what's wrong and let's talk about whose fault it is, rather than, well, actually, let's talk about what the opportunity is here. Let's talk about some of the good things.
What's right.
Let's talk it up as well, like you say, John, with sufficient humility to say, there's some good stuff going on here, but there's some stuff that I just know isn't right and I want to put right. How can you help? And this is the dialogue we need. This is the modern dialogue we need between leaders across organisations. We're not getting it from our political colleagues at the moment. We know in terms of the politics now globally, not just in the UK, is very adversarial. It's not good modelling, and it doesn't make for a good society and a good strategic conversation across agencies and organisations, nationally, to produce things like collaborative visions. But we could spend all day, all week, all year talking about what's wrong with leisure and why it's not credible. But let's start talking about what's good about it, and let's talking about what the opportunity is. Because I know for a fact that everybody that's operating a leisure facility out there today will be doing their best in difficult circumstances, and lots of the things that are wrong are outside of their control.
Sport England, big announcement. Right, I love that. Big announcement in November. £250 million being earmarked to be devoted to place-based partnerships seeking to address health inequalities, targeted at those places that need it the most. What's your sense on that decision, that particular mode of attack, I suppose?
Yeah. I think the principle of targeting inequalities is absolutely sound, and we talked about that earlier, didn't we? And so for a method of attack, I think absolutely spot on. I think, there's the term, isn't it, you often use, and our colleague Martin Allison and the Marmot report, proportionate universalism. We have to invest proportionally more resources in areas of deprivation to level up, and that's what levelling up's all about. Because we know that if we improve the conditions in areas of deprivation, improve the local economy, local health, it benefits everybody, and it absolutely does. The research is unquestionable in that area. So I think as an approach, it's great. The question is it working? So I'm still not convinced that with quite a number of years now of Sport England investment into local delivery pilots, that there has been an appropriate level of return on that investment. And what I have to do is model what I said earlier here. It's about not being judgmental, about being appreciative and saying, well, what's worked and how can we take what's worked and scale it? And there will be things that's worked. But I think for me, looking at some of those things, and I've read the case studies and the reports, is a lot of what has been discovered with that work was not necessarily unavailable before. It's stuff that we probably already knew. So it's how much we're doing, investing money, reinventing the wheel here, and actually, are we tackling the real issue? And the real issue is not to go and find out what's wrong, because we know what's wrong and we've got a whole range of solutions to address it. It's about reconfiguring the service delivery and the workforce to do something about it at scale. And this comes back again to Vision 2050, to getting all the agencies to collaborate, to training and developing the leadership and the workforce to provide the solutions on the ground in those communities. And I think where the waters get a little bit muddy is you can get caught in discussions about, well, it's not about doing to people, it's about enabling in communities. It absolutely is, but it's a combination of both. You can go and do an empowering sports development initiative in an area where the degrees of deprivation are not so bad that those people just are relatively helpless and they can't even think about setting up community groups and clubs because the issues they're dealing with are so profound. So there needs to be a level of delivery and support in certain areas, and in other areas you can go down full down the community enablement solution. But it's a mixed economy.
Okay, thanks, Mark. We're going to go to the quick-fire questions for all, which might not be quick-fire answers, and that's absolutely fine, but I wanted to go on some of these. So there's a general election looming this year. Chances are, if you believe the polls and the sort of zeitgeist, that there'll be a change. What's one thing would you wish an incoming new government to do in relation to what we've talked about today?
I would like an incoming government to make health and well-being a top 5 priority. They like the top 5, don't they?
They do.
I like that to be in the top 5, but not from a treatment perspective, from a prevention perspective. And from a prevention perspective, that would be a cross-agency approach and get cross-party agreement. I think I would love to see that, and that would be a massive economic driver.
Do you see any indication that's, or any sort of green shoots that there's maybe a chance of that?
I think I've seen. Well, I know there's some. There's been conversations with the opposition. And you've got, Kim Leadbeater's been on platform and talking very eloquently about the opportunity. But with any kind of pre-election rhetoric, you've always got to kind of balance that against the reality of what happens when they get in government and then they get sidetracked with the reactionary stuff.
Yeah.
And some of what is now popularist as well in government. So hopefully that early rhetoric now can be maintained, and then, for example, if it is a Labour government, and the pundits seem to think it will be, that will be followed through, because it seems at the moment where we are is that leisure and public leisure is really quite drifting. It's not really being led with a purposeful vision that we've talked about.
Yeah.
And because it's drifting, the diminishing resources in the public sector are steering its course.
Okay.
If we lock onto the notion that we exist as a preventative health service or preventative wellness service, Mark, in political terms, where's our natural home? DCMS? DH? Neither?
Well, my
Who could deliver for us at a political level, at scale, as you talk, the preventative health service that we aspire to be?
Well, I know I've got friends who are doctors, who are surgeons, not lots, because I was a PE teacher, so I don't tend to frequent in these circles too often. But I have got people in those. I know people in those professions, and I can honestly, and public health colleagues, some great public health colleagues that I've worked with over the years. And the interesting thing is that every time we have a conversation, they all tell me they would like to spend more of their time and more of the NHS resource in prevention, but something wrong with the system that doesn't allow it to happen. So I think everyone's on board with the idea that the NHS would be a great partner for us, and we could form this national wellness service that went hand in hand with the NHS as a treatment service.
Yeah.
One of the best treatment services in the world. And the people in the NHS want that, but their focus is elsewhere. It's on reaction and treatment. So I think that would be a good home for us. But I would, and this is controversial, whereas I'm a big champion of localism and local communities being empowered to have a democratic position on how their services are delivered locally through local government. I do think often local government can just be an Achilles heel for us, because it means we're trying to do the same things in different ways all over the country, and the amount of duplication and duplicated effort and resource, and often sometimes decisions come down to local politics which aren't necessarily the best decision in terms of population health.
Okay.
So I think if we could depoliticise public leisure, I think that would be a step forward. On balance, a step forward.
That's a great quote. I'm going to use that.
It is good. It is very good. Final question before we ask you for a recommendation. Are you optimistic about the future of the sector?
Absolutely, with you two doing this podcast, without a shadow of a doubt. I think someone once said to me, and I think this is a quote, I don't know who said it, but be brutally honest in the short term, but brutally confident and optimistic about the long term. And you have to live your life like that, because that is a very empowering statement. So examine where we are, look at kind of, what's not quite right and what you can do about it, and then be confident and drive towards changing it. And again, vision. It's all about vision. It's all about bringing people and coalescing them around that vision. But I'm really confident. I think, out of every crisis comes an opportunity. We're definitely in a crisis situation now, economically, nationally, and with public leisure being a discretionary service. But there's a big opportunity here to be part of the solution. So I'm really optimistic.
Good
About it.
Final thing then, just to pick up on the whole purpose thing and your point about appreciative inquiry and championing the good bits that go on. And what we're trying to do is a bit of that, a bit of disruption, but a bit of, hey, we're here, stuff's happening that it's really, really, really good. So we know that collaboration exists between leisure and health. Who should we be shining a light on that we can really put on a pedestal and say, hey, this is the type of good stuff. Who would you suggest we look at and get into that seat?
Right. I think Warren Smythe, Abbeycross Leisure, he's been doing fantastic work for over a decade now. Really, been in the same job for a significant amount of time to prove track record and to try a lot of stuff. And he's great at relationships with his client and the council. Great leader with his team. So Warren would be fantastic. I think there are other chief execs that I could name as well, but
leave it there. I know you could, but we'll leave it with Warren, and we'll pick up with Warren. Mark, that's been fantastic. Thank you so much. And as we expected, to be honest with you, that's part one. We'll get you back for part two, because there's so much that you've said there that we could delve into a bit deeper. There's other things we haven't even touched on yet which would be fantastic to do. So if you'd be happy to come back, we'd love you back. But thank you so much, and all the best.
Yeah, I'd love to come back if you get me a coffee next time. That would be a bonus. Thanks.
That's a very good point.
On that, it's coffee time.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Well done, mate.
Thank you.
Thanks.